Right now on Morning News Now, collision course, the race for the White House now in its final hours. The latest and last NBC News national poll ahead of tomorrow's vote shows Vice President Kamala Harris and former President Donald Trump in a dead heat.
So we got to get our country straightened out or we're not going to have a country. All right? That's all.
I see voters standing together to defend freedom. This moment in our nation has to be about so much more than partisan politics.
We've got the latest from the trail, including a shocking poll out of Iowa as the candidates make one last pitch to undecided voters. And one of the most critical voting blocs will be Gen Z, with more than 80% of young voters saying they were at least somewhat likely to vote. College campuses have become targets for misinformation campaigns. I talked to students about the apparent effort to keep them home on Election Day. Also this morning, deadly encounter. 2 Ohio police officers have been charged in the death of a black man who told them he couldn't breathe. The critical body camera video and what investigators say caused the conflict. And remembering a music titan. This morning, the entertainment world is paying tribute to Quincy Jones. The music icon's career spanned more than 7 decades and helped shape pop music for generations. We have a look back at his life. An unparalleled legacy, something you've been looking into this morning.
Yeah, very few people have had a career like Quincy Jones. In fact, perhaps no one has. Yeah. It is absolutely iconic, spanning 6+ decades. We'll take a good look back. Good to have you with us on this Monday morning. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers. Thanks for joining us today. We are, of course, kicking off a week that could be unlike any other in our country's history, with the election now just 1 day away.
For months, it has been a neck-and-neck race between Vice President Harris and former President Trump. And our final national NBC News poll ahead of the election reflects, well, exactly that. The poll shows both candidates getting the support of 49% of registered voters, with just 2% of voters saying they're unsure about their choice. It is slated to be a busy final day of the campaign for both VP Harris and Mr. Trump. They both have several campaign events on the schedule today, including multiple stops in the all-important battleground state of Pennsylvania. Over the weekend, the candidates made their final pitches to voters.
We stand on the verge of the 4 greatest years in American history. You watch. It's going to be so good. It's going to be so much fun. It'll be nasty a little bit at times, and maybe at the beginning in particular, but it's going to be something.
We have an opportunity in this election to finally turn the page on a decade of politics driven by fear and division. We are done with that, and we are exhausted with it.
Many voters continued to take advantage of early voting, according to the latest data from Target Smart and analyzed by the NBC News Decision Desk. More than 76 million people have already cast their ballots.
Leading us off this morning, we're joined by NBC News correspondent Vaughn Hilliard, who's covering the Trump campaign. Also, NBC News White House correspondent Ali Rafa, who's following Vice President Harris. Good morning to both of you. Vaughn, you are in North Carolina, where former President Trump is starting his day. But let's recap a busy weekend on the campaign trail, visiting important swing states. Mr. Trump shared his vision with supporters, also continued to air out grievances, including against the media. What are some of the takeaways?
It was a freewheeling weekend for Donald Trump here, not only suggesting that he should never have left the White House after the 2020 election. Of course, he left down to Mar-a-Lago just hours before Joe Biden was sworn in on Inauguration Day. But for him, so much of this was also painting a dark image of what he says America would look like under a Harris administration, suggesting that the country would go into economic depression, as well as people would start feeling depressed and that people would lose their jobs. And for Donald Trump, of course, we heard a similar type of message 4 years ago, suggesting that the stock market would crash under Joe Biden. Much of that did not come to fruition. But for Donald Trump, he is trying to use the consequences he says would take place under a Harris administration to try to compel his supporters to make sure that they turn out and vote here in these last now 36 hours. I want to let you also listen to another one of his remarks when talking about the press corps. Take a listen.
And I have this piece of glass here, but all we have really over here is the fake news, right? And to get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news, and I don't mind that so much, because I don't mind.
And this is one of those situations here where Donald Trump is not trying to moderate his message by any means. Instead, he is using denigrating language about Kamala Harris, calling her low IQ. And for Donald Trump, this is how he's run for the last 9 years. And clearly, in these closing hours, how he is personally choosing to finish off this crucial campaign.
Allie, let's bring you in here and talk about the other side of this, the Harris campaign. Also a busy day ahead with multiple stops in Pennsylvania. Where's she going and what's her messaging today, especially to that tiny 2% of undecided voters that we saw in this NBC News poll in these final hours here?
Yeah, guys, the vice president is going to focus her last day on a must-win Pennsylvania, a state that she admits is critical to her path to victory here. And she'll start off her day in Scranton, Pennsylvania, before heading to Allentown for a massive Get Out the Vote rally. Tonight, she'll head to Pittsburgh for another rally, and then finally end this campaign with a star-studded campaign event in Philadelphia, right in front of the Art Museum there, those famous Rocky Steps. And among the stars and celebrities expected to appear there are Lady Gaga, Ricky Martin, as well as Oprah. Now, as far as the vice president's closing message here, it's one of hope and unity. Remember, she has continued to say that the American people are exhausted from the chaotic and divisive rhetoric she says that Trump represents. And in a notable shift from past speeches, during her speech yesterday in Lansing, Michigan, she notably did not mention the former president by name, sort of a capstone on this campaign and on that messaging of turning the page and moving on from former President Trump. Listen to some of her remarks here.
Momentum because our campaign is tapping into the ambitions, the aspirations, and the dreams of the American people. Because we are optimistic and excited about what we can do together. And because we know it is time for a new generation of leadership in America.
And in this final push to win over those still undecided voters that you mentioned, Savannah, the Harris campaign over the weekend released a 2-minute closing ad specifically targeting those voters.
So, Vaughn, quickly, what can we expect on this final full day of campaigning from the Trump camp?
He's got 4 final stops here in battleground North Carolina and Raleigh. Our man Tony Butler will give you a sense here. This is sunrise, and already there are several thousand who are coming out for Donald Trump's final North Carolina event. He's then going to make his way to Reading, Pennsylvania for an event, as well as Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, before finishing the night in Grand Rapids, Michigan. That's the same place that he finished off his 2016 and 2020 campaigns. This is a sprawling, scrambling 7 battleground states, or even more potentially battleground states, and this is where it shows where the campaign's final focus is for Donald Trump. That's North Carolina, Pennsylvania, and Michigan, which, if he were to win those, would likely put him over 270 electoral college votes.
And Allie, quickly, what do we know about the vice president's plans for Election Day and night?
Yeah, guys, we know she's going to be spending the day and night at her alma mater of Howard University right here in Washington, D.C. And campaign officials say they are prepared for what could be a very long night or week ahead as we wait for the final results.
All right, Vaughn and Allie, thank you both.
Well, let's dig into a poll from a red state that's been in Donald Trump's column in the past that set off shockwaves in the world of politics over the weekend.
The latest Des Moines Register poll from Saturday shows Vice President Kamala Harris leading former President Trump by 3 percentage points in Iowa. She's up 47% to 44% in the state, which Mr. Trump won by 8 percentage points back in 2020. Now, that is within the margin of error. This poll certainly an outlier, but it does have a very reliable track record, and it's sparking questions over whether this red state could be in play on Tuesday. Mr. Trump was quick to dismiss the poll at his rally in Pennsylvania Sunday.
They just announced a fake poll. Hey, think of it. Right before the election that I'm 3 points down. I'm not down in Iowa. I got $28 billion for the farmers. $28 billion.
So is Iowa back to being a battleground? Let's bring in NBC News correspondent Maura Barrett. She is in Cedar Rapids this morning. Maura, good morning. So I know you, just to put in context how shocking kind of these results were scrambled there. We were texting over the weekend. You were sent to Iowa because this sort of came on our radar. What could be behind this shift of support toward Vice President Harris?
Yes, Vanna, this was definitely a surprise both here in the state and nationally, obviously. And part of that is because it's an outlier compared to other polls that have come out in the state. But it's also a significant shift from the same poll, the same pollsters, previous polls in recent months. Back in June, for example, then President Democratic nominee was behind Trump by 18 points. So Joe Biden behind him by 18 points. Then you fast forward to September when Kamala Harris was the nominee. Trump was still leading the poll by 4 points. And so there's a big flip-flop here, and that's something that even Democratic and Republican strategists here have kind of thrown big question marks at me since I've been back in the state. But the big shift that we've seen in this poll is Kamala Harris seemingly pulling both independent women and senior women more into her camp. And that's something, part of the electorate, that's very important here. There's also the important context that over the summer, Iowa passed a very strict 6-week abortion ban, and that's why we are potentially seeing more women shift or coming in more for turnout purposes. And so this is something that everyone is kind of flagging as this big outlier, but the pollster J.N. Seltzer has typically been right in the past. She has an incredibly strong record, known as the gold standard. She's been an outlier pretty much every time before she's put out a poll, but she's also been right.
And Mara, you spoke with voters there in Lynn County, that's east of Des Moines. How are they reacting to this poll?
Voters here were basically just as surprised as we were when we saw that poll come out. For context, here in Lynn County, the split of voter registrations is about 40% Democrat, 40% Independent, and 20% Republican. So it's a little bit of a diverse set of voters that we were able to talk to. Keep in mind, Iowa is largely a very rural, very red state. But I want you to hear some of the conversations I had with voters here yesterday.
It's kind of nice to see people are thinking twice, thinking more of not just kind of one-sided, but more open-minded.
This is has been historically a swing state between Republican and Democrat, so I'm not going to be shocked if Harris wins the state.
Traditionally, Iowa has tended to lean more conservative, and so finding that Harris was ahead was very nice. It was a nice surprise for us.
You heard the one gentleman mention that Iowa used to be a swing state, or seen as a swing state. In recent memory, that hasn't been the case. I lived here back in 2019 and 2020 reporting on the Iowa caucuses, and it was always a given that it was going to be Republican held. And so the fact that this is all being called into question potentially when Donald Trump is still on the ballot, having performed so successfully here in the past, is why it's coming out to be potentially a really last-minute battleground state this year, guys.
All right, more cute little guest star there, too, in that interview. Thank you so much.
All right, let's continue our conversation with NBC News chief political analyst Chuck Todd. We'll talk about Iowa in a sec. Let's start with sort of the bigger picture here. And just obviously our poll shows it's as close as is humanly possible. Does either side then have any sort of momentum or anything, especially considering how many people have already voted?
I think if you think campaigns still matter here at the end, meaning that the conversation that's being had at the end, if that stuff matters, Harris has a little bit of momentum. And there is some data to back that up, that you do see some shift. Like we saw a very slight, subtle shift towards her a little bit. But you gotta, we know that Donald Trump does really well with voters who are not common voters. They're very difficult to poll. And if you told me he ended up doing really well and sort of sweeping the battlegrounds, it'll mean, okay, we still can't always poll those, basically those unreliable voters. I don't know how else to describe them.
Who don't vote in midterms, who don't vote any other time.
And they've been making a real effort. It's a hard demographic group to rely on. And you look at who she's relying on, and these are voting groups that show up, like senior women. Like they're showing up, 95% chance they show up. Younger men of color don't have the same statistical edge there about voter turnout.
Let's now talk about Iowa. So as Maura pointed out, in very recent memory, been read, but not always the case. How significant do you find that poll to be?
Well, Iowa is surrounded by battleground states.
Yeah.
Half of the state is, 2 of the state's 4 congressional districts are heavily contested. They're coin flip races. The Omaha media market, we know the Omaha congressional district in Nebraska is that single electoral vote that does get awarded. There has been more money spent in that media market than ever before. That bleeds into Western Iowa. So you also, it is borders Minnesota, it borders Wisconsin. So when I say it is surrounded by battleground states, I mean it. And that matters, right? That leaks over. This is not as if there hasn't been a conversation. Those two House races, one in Des Moines and one in the Cedar Rapids market, abortion rights is about the top issue that the two candidates are using. You throw it in with theirs. So you sit there and you say, hey, maybe there is something going on with older white voters. We see evidence of Harris overperforming with them in Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania. There's a Kansas poll, okay, about also a state demographically looks a lot like Iowa, very rural, very white, also, though, higher than average in the Midwest of college-educated folks. And we saw that Trump only had a 5-point lead there. There is a little bit of evidence that it is a signal. It doesn't mean Harris is going to win Iowa. Right. But it does mean she may have seen a movement among older white voters that we have been detecting ourselves, that maybe this is the signal like, oh, if she wins the presidency through the North, which is where her path is, this Iowa poll could be the canary in the coal mine.
Let's quickly talk about the thing you mentioned yesterday at Meet the Press, which is your worst fear,
yes.
that we should mentally prepare for the possibility of, after Election Day, a tie.
Oh, look, it is a flaw in the Constitution, okay? It is a landmine sitting there, unfortunately ready to explode. Because, yes, the House would pick the president, but before we got to a certified electoral vote count of 269, those 538 people will get lobbied. This is we have these laws about faithless electors, and I almost hesitate to even use the phrase right now because I think people are going, what is he talking about? If we're talking about faithless electors in 3 days, it's been a really close election.
Yes.
Hopefully, in 3 days, I'm not saying the phrase faithless electors. We don't have to worry about that. But it does remind, I think a lot of us believe that this is an election that's going to look a lot more like 2000 and 2004, which you had the battleground split between the two parties, and you had the winner not clearing more than 284 electoral votes, so which would be a very, very narrow win. And we handled it okay in 2000 and okay in 04. Good luck, America.
All right.
Yeah.
We'll see what happens.
We'll see what happens.
Thank you for that.
Let's go vote.
Anxiety-inducing last note. Great to have you, Chuck. Well, young voters ages 18 to 29, known as Gen Z, are a critical voting bloc this election. And much attention has been focused on trying to snag their vote, especially on college campuses, especially in battleground states. But along with it, misinformation has targeted those same potential voters, worrying some the confusion could keep them home.
Among the many questions about what will happen in this election, will Gen Zers turn out to vote?
Have you pledged to vote?
According to our most recent NBC News Stay Tuned Gen Z poll powered by SurveyMonkey, an overwhelming majority of them say they will. 84% of 18 to 29-year-olds surveyed said they were at least somewhat likely to vote. And both campaigns need them to. With nearly 41 million eligible voters, they have the potential to swing the election. But in these crucial last moments before polls close, college students have been the targets of misinformation campaigns, seemingly aimed at causing confusion for first-time voters.
I know you got a text.
Yes. Tanisha Vanden Langenberg is the student body vice president at the University of Wisconsin-Green Bay.
So it said something about if you vote in a state that you're not eligible in, according to Wisconsin statute, whatever statutes, you could face up to 3 years in prison or $10,000 in fines.
Wow. What did you think when you got it?
For me, I was just kind of like, what the heck? I know that a lot of other students were confused by it, and it created a lot of talk on campus where it was like, wait, can I vote or can't I vote, or how do I vote, or do I have to go back home? Because a lot of students can't just fly back to Texas to vote, you know.
Students don't need to fly home, despite the threat in that text received by an estimated thousands of college-age people in Wisconsin. College students are able to vote in the state where they attend school. In addition, it is not illegal to be registered in 2 states, although, of course, it is illegal to vote in 2 states. In Pennsylvania, the Secretary of State is alleging some students were improperly denied voter registration and in-person mail ballot requests because they did not have a Pennsylvania driver's license or were registered in another state. Efforts Vanden Langenberg worries are meant to keep her and her peers home.
Why do you think somebody sent that text?
I think that college students definitely have the ability to make an impact on this election, and there are definitely people who do not want us to vote. And so if you confuse college students or confuse people who are already on edge about whether they are going to vote or who they're going to vote for, they're just going to say, oh, well, I don't get it. I don't, like, it's not worth it.
Thanks to those students for speaking with us about those concerns. We'll keep you updated on it. Well, it's a stormy start to the week. This morning, we've got severe weather threat from Texas to Missouri. We have Michelle Grossman in studio tracking it all for us. Hey, Michelle, good morning.
Hey there, Savannah. Yeah, it was a stormy weekend, and we are starting out stormy as well. You can see radar showing us all the activity that's happening from the south central states up through the Midwest, and that's going to be the story all throughout this Monday, and then eventually moving to the east on Election Day. So this is what it looks like right now. Heavy rain falling. That's where you're seeing those brighter returns, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, even seeing a little purple popping in the state of Texas. That could indicate some hail, and that will be a threat throughout the day. Back behind the system, it's colder, so we're seeing some snow falling in the Rockies. That's going to start to taper off before we see another storm system moving in the Pacific Northwest, and that's going to bring some heavy mountain snow over the next several days. This is what it looks like in terms of the severe weather threat. You want to stay weather aware today because 17 million people at risk. We're looking at damaging winds up to 60 miles per hour. Also hail, that's going to be a concern. Several tornadoes are possible too, especially in this orange area where you see this hatched area. Places like Fort Smith, Tulsa, Ardmore into Dallas could see some strong storms, tornadoes as we go throughout the evening hours. We're even seeing tornado warnings early this morning. So 7 million people at risk for flood alerts because another concern is some very heavy rainfall. We're seeing that now, and it's not moving very fast. So it's going to train over the same areas. We're looking at places like Tulsa, Wichita, Oklahoma City, Harrison. That's where we're seeing a flash flood warning, and we're going to see those warnings pop in and out. What does a warning mean? It means flooding is happening now or it's imminent. So we're going to watch this cold front move to the east as we head throughout today, bringing the threat for severe storms from the south all the way to the Midwest. And then here's Election Day. We're looking at that system moving into the Midwest, and that's going to bring some wet weather. This is what it looks like on Election Day. Unfortunately, we will need those umbrellas at the polls from portions of the south, the Gulf Coast, into parts of the Ohio Valley, the Great Lakes, even some snow on the backside of this in parts of the upper Midwest. Now look at the Intermountain West. We're looking at temperatures in the 40s. We're looking at the chance for some heavy snowfall, even some blizzard warnings there. That's a really strong system that's moving on shore. And then as we head towards the Northeast, New England, weather looking good there too. Could see some showers too in the Southeast tomorrow.
All right, as we're maybe heading into fallish, coldish.
You know, it's funny, and then that's more like a spring setup, right?
Again.
Yeah, I know.
It's like a whiplash. All right, Michelle, thank you so much. Sure. Well, this morning, the entertainment world is mourning the loss of an icon. Quincy Jones has died at 91 years old. His impressive career spanned more than 70 years, ranging from producing Michael Jackson's historic Thriller album to writing award-winning film and television scores. For more on his incredible legacy, let's bring in our friend, entertainment journalist and pop culture expert, Brian Balthazar. Brian, good morning. Always great to have you with us. So let's just start taking a look back at his music career, working with some of the biggest names in the business. I just mentioned Michael Jackson, Frank Sinatra. Walk us through some of these biggest collaborations and why it was that so many legends wanted to work with him.
Right. Good morning. So it really is impossible to have listened to a radio or seen a movie or watched television and not have been touched by Quincy Jones's music. We're talking collaborations and working with Dizzy Gillespie, Ella Fitzgerald, Count Basie, skip ahead to Frank Sinatra and Tony Bennett, and then contemporary artists like Michael Jackson, Snoop Dogg, Chaka Khan, and Queen Latifah. And it's a testament to his talent and his range, really. I mean, this is decades and decades of work, working with amazing artists, but also creating great artists in the process. A gifted and talented instrumentalist himself, he would go on to compose and compose soundtracks, create the soundtrack of our lives, really.
As we said, his career also included music for film and TV, soundtrack of our lives. You know, it's those moments, those shows, those movies that we love and we recognize. What are some of the bigger movies and shows he was attached to?
Really some incredible ones. Okay, so of course, if you're a sitcom watcher, The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air, he was not only behind the music in which he created a young star in Will Smith, but also he was an executive producer on that show. And one of the writers, Andy Borowitz, said he actually based this in some part on Quincy's family. Quincy had 7 kids, and this was kind of a reflection of his life, but also much more serious content like the series Roots, the original series Roots, in which he was honored for his soundtrack there. Again, an incredible series that was lauded for its music and its content there. But he also was behind the inauguration of Bill Clinton. He wrote the theme to Sanford and Son, and he's done the score for the Academy Awards. So he really, again, this is the hyphenate. This is the definition of a hyphenate who can really do it all.
Absolutely. He also was known for using his art as activism at times. Famously, he had a hand in the We Are the World Music for Africa project. But can you talk a little bit about some of those bigger projects?
Right. A great example is We Are the World, because this is a collaboration of artists that it's hard to imagine this happening today. If you look in that room, the amount of coordination, and then, of course, having a great hit song, which he co-wrote with Lionel Richie. This was to end famine, or at least contribute to help Ethiopia and the problem of famine and starvation in this country and in the world, I should say, in the world. And so that's one of them. And, of course, the Roots, you can't underestimate the power of that series of Roots, and talking about our Black history, and this really started a dialogue in the culture about slavery and the history of the Black culture and African American people and the struggles that they've gone through. Quincy Jones has always kind of connected the power of music and its ability to connect and create emotion and reaction in people. And whether that was creating a funny song or creating something really moving, it was something he clearly did really well. 91 years old, what an amazing career. And it's impossible, again, to not have been touched in some way by his work.
Yeah, amazing career, amazing life. Brian, we so appreciate you on this breaking news, getting up early to walk us through it. Quincy Jones passing away at the age of 91. Thank you, Brian. Well, as millions of voters prepare to head to the polls, the U.S. is trying a new strategy to combat foreign election interference, but is it working? Plus, 2 white police officers have been charged in the death of a Black man, the crucial body camera video, and what led up to the deadly encounter. After the break. Welcome back. 2 police officers in Ohio are now facing reckless homicide charges and up to 3 years in prison for the death of a Black man in a bar while responding to a 911 call in April. The officers are accused of kneeling on the man who was on his stomach while he repeatedly says, "I can't breathe." NBC News correspondent Maggie Vespa has the details, and we have to warn you, there's body camera video in this story that could be disturbing for some viewers.
That's that gentleman standing at the bar right there.
Please get him out of here now.
Criminal charges against 2 Ohio police officers who prosecutors say killed Frank Tyson in a Canton, Ohio bar. Body camera video shows officers Camden Birch and Bo Shonegi wrestling the 53-year-old to the ground back in April, one kneeling on him.
I can't breathe. I can't. You don't want that. I can't breathe.
You're fine. You're good. Shut the
And later leaving him face down, motionless for more than 5 minutes before checking his pulse.
Now we know who the bad guy is. And it wasn't Frank.
Prosecutors charging the officers with reckless homicide.
No one is above the law.
Saying the 3rd-degree felony could carry 3 years in prison. That point frustrating for Tyson's brother.
You don't believe those charges are strong enough?
No, I do not. In today's time, when a man said he can't breathe, and whether he can't breathe or not, just saying it should be an eye-opener.
A police union rep saying, "We urge people to give these officers the same rights as the people they arrest. They are innocent until proven guilty." Police said the April encounter began with Tyson crashing his car into a pole and running into the bar.
We're a private club. Somebody came in. We've asked him to leave. He won't leave.
What is he doing?
He's screaming at our members. He won't leave.
An autopsy report obtained by our affiliate WKYC shows Tyson died of cardiopulmonary arrest in association with physical altercation and prone restraint. Maggie Vespa, NBC News.
In the face of fake videos that have already gone viral before Election Day, U.S. intelligence and law enforcement officials are changing tactics this year on how they respond to foreign countries' attempts to interfere in our elections. In the past, officials have flagged disinformation posts to those social media companies. This year, though, they are declassifying certain information and sharing it directly with the public. NBC News global security reporter Dan DeLuce joins us for more on this. Dan, good morning. Such an important topic as we hurtle towards tomorrow. So voters have been hit with this wave of false election-related content from several countries so far in this election. We mentioned declassifying certain information, but first, can you explain what else U.S. officials are doing this year to try to fight this interference and if it's working?
You know, the key here is they're really trying to move faster. So they were really scarred by what happened in 2016 when the Russians hacked into Hillary Clinton's campaign, leaked a huge amount of information. They really were blindsided, and they were very cautious at that point about saying anything publicly. This time, they are moving very fast. So when a video came out last week that was falsely claiming voter fraud in Georgia, you had a public statement very quickly from the ODNI, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence, cyber security officials, the FBI. So they're trying to move faster. Another thing they're doing is they're trying to also sort of use the legal authority of the Justice Department. So they've issued some indictments and other legal actions that have gone after fake websites as a violation of copyright. They've issued sanctions. And then they've released all this material, internal memos inside the Kremlin's propaganda operation. And I think that's partly to try to embarrass them and try to expose their collaborators and their partners and complicate things for them.
So, Dan, you're touching on this right now. Russia, right? One of the biggest bad actors, as our government calls them, funneling these fake videos and information into the U.S. We now even know calling the operation Project Good Ol' USA in a secret memo. But for viewers who feel like they've heard a lot about, the words Russian interference or collusion, and they don't really understand how, somebody over there could infiltrate our election, could impact voters who have decided what they want to do. Walk us through exactly how this information is spread by a country like Russia to voters here and how it could impact how people vote.
So this is a very old tactic that dates back to the Russian Revolution. It's really 100 years old. It's just now they're using new technology. And what the idea is, they look at American society, they see what issues are dividing us, they see the social and political divisions and polarization, and then they try to amplify it and kind of ride that wave. And so, for example, you have Americans alleging voter fraud 4 years ago, that whole idea. And then the Russians then produced their own false videos, false information, false actors that try to build on that and kind of stir divisions among Americans. So the message is here really to be careful about what you're reading and where you get your information. And the secretaries of state and election offices in your state are the ones who tell you when and where you can vote, and not some kind of random video that might seem plausible at first glance. So the Russian idea is to promote Donald Trump's candidacy. They believe that he's going to more protect their interests, and they're trying to weaken American support for Ukraine. So they're very strongly opposed to Democrats and Democratic candidates because they're worried that they will continue to provide support to Ukraine in that war.
Dan, such important information about a really touchy, complicated topic. We have to stay vigilant in these last hours as we head to the election. We'll be checking in with you. Thanks for covering it. We've got a lot more to get to on Morning News Now, including the battle over transgender rights and how it's playing out this election cycle. Stay with us. We're back with a look at how LGBTQ rights have become a big focus of this year's election. First, anti-LGBTQ rhetoric, hate incidents, and policies have grown in the U.S. This also includes attacks on the rights of trans people. In the last 2 years, more than 100 state laws have been passed that restrict trans rights around health care or target the livelihoods of the LGBTQ community. Hate crimes against LGBTQ people have increased by 19% from last year. And anti-transgender incidents have increased more than 35%. Those stats are according to the FBI. We've seen this issue front and center on the campaign trail. Former President Trump and Republicans around the country have spent tens of millions on ads with anti-trans messages. CEO and president of GLAAD, Sarah Kate Ellis, is here to break down the issues targeting LGBTQ people in this year's election. Good morning. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good morning. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. It's always great to have you here on set with us. So we know here at NBC News, we've been speaking to members of this community, talking to these voters. We know historically, and we're also hearing from a lot of these voters that they plan to vote for Harris. But how do you think, just right now, especially as we're talking about, any and every segment of the population, whether that's women vote, young men vote, how it can sway or impact, how do you think this vote impacts the election?
This vote could be the deciding factor. In 7 of the 9 battleground states, there are more young LGBTQ voters in this election cycle than there were voters that made the decision in 2020. So we have the margin for young LGBTQ votes in 7 of those 9 battleground states. And I think For us, there's so much on the line. Our recent poll said 94% of registered LGBTQ voters are going to vote this election.
Yeah, and actually another stat, right? 94% highly motivated in this year's election. Do you think that that's something that we really could see play out in battleground states?
Absolutely. Because we are the margins, we make the decisions in those states if we show up at the polls, and we're motivated to show up at the polls. So we've been running an aggressive get out the vote campaign in those battleground states to motivate and educate our constituents on what's at stake in this election.
What do you think about the messaging in some of these political ads? And just the fact that in some ways, it seems like to Republicans, it's working because they continue to do that. We continue to see those ads in terms of it being on the other side, a motivating issue.
Mm-hmm. So we've actually tested those ads, and we did it with Ground Media recently, the new ones that are coming out. You said they spent $20 million in the battleground states in just 1 week on these anti-trans ads. And what we found is that they had zero influence on motivation to vote and changing candidates to vote. So it didn't influence who you're going to vote for or if you're going to vote. So they basically just wasted $20 million. But what these ads do that is terrifying for our community is they gin up hate and fear around trans people, because only 30% of Americans say they know someone who's trans. So the majority of Americans are learning about trans people through ads like this that are showing them in really awful ways when they're just human beings.
What would you like to see from the next president, regardless of who it is, just from the top down when it comes to this?
Well, what I'm most scared about in this coming presidential election is Project 2025. And we started running ads early on about this because if you look at that 900-page document that guts the government and brings in a dictatorship, on the front page of that is LGBTQ people and our rights. So I'd like to see our rights codified beyond the Supreme Court, because the Supreme Court now has extremists in it. And so we have no protections at the federal level from an LGBTQ position. And we need those moving forward from the candidate who wins.
Sarah K. Ellis, we always appreciate your time. Thank you for joining us during a big week.
Thank you.
Great to see you. Well, the legal fight over Elon Musk's $1 million giveaway in Pennsylvania is set to continue in a Philadelphia courthouse this morning. A civil lawsuit from Philadelphia's Democratic district attorney accuses Musk and his pro-Trump super PAC of hosting an illegal lottery meant to influence voters in that crucial battleground state ahead of the election. Well, now a judge will decide whether to pick up the billionaire's case in federal court or bump it back down to Pennsylvania's state court. NBC News contributor Kristen Gibbons-Fedden joins us for more on this. She's also a civil rights attorney and former prosecutor. Kristen, good morning. So the details here, and we've talked with many of our friends here on the show about this, Danny Ceballos, Angela Sanadella, some of our other legal analysts, and these details are important, right? It's about you have to be a registered voter in one of seven battleground states and sign a petition. This is specifically pledging support for the First and Second Amendment, free speech and the right to bear arms. It's not saying vote for so-and-so or register to vote and then you get this money, which I think is an important distinction because that's where the legality comes into question, right? So what do you make of this? Would federal prosecutors have a strong case if it's related to this idea that you can't pay people to register to vote?
Well, I think one of the things that's important here, Savannah, is you nailed it on the head. You know, this is not a paying to vote, but Pennsylvania has very strict, stringent laws with regard to lotteries. And that's exactly what we see here. Pennsylvania law specifically prohibits unauthorized lotteries. The lotteries in the state of Pennsylvania must be state regulated and for the public benefit. So that's one of the key elements that District Attorney Krasner is actually going after. And that's why it is very interesting for today's hearing as to whether or not this particular case will go on to federal court or remain in state court, because what Krasner is specifically arguing is that what is happening in Pennsylvania, not necessarily throughout all of the battleground states, which is the defense's crux of their argument, what is happening in Pennsylvania specifically violates Pennsylvania law, not only the law regulating what constitutes a lottery, but also the law that constitutes unfair trade practices and the Consumer Protection Act.
How would this be different, or what would that mean if it were to become a federal case?
If it were to become a federal case, that would implicate other potentially other types of laws. Again, it would have to, in this particular case, it could affect all of the multiple states. It could particularly touch on federal election laws. But in this particular case, Krasner's complaint is really specifically touching on what is happening in Pennsylvania and whether or not the consumer protection laws are being implicated here.
And of course, the purpose of this particular suit in Pennsylvania was to stop this before Election Day, which is now tomorrow, and those giveaways continue. Kristen Gibbons-Fedden, we really appreciate you. Thank you so much. Well, with marijuana already legal in nearly half of the country, recreational weed is back on the ballot in 4 new states. And it's not the only drug that could be legalized. What voters are set to consider and what it could mean for the future of American drug policy up next.
Welcome back. It's not just the presidential race or a battle for Congress on the ballot. Tomorrow, voters in several states are set to decide on a number of ballot measures, including some that could shape the future of drug policies in America.
Marijuana, of course, has already been legalized for recreational or medical use in nearly half the country, and now it is on the ballot in 4 more states. And in Massachusetts, where cannabis is already legal, voters will now decide if psychedelics should be legalized.
Joining us now for more on this, CNBC reporter Brandon Gomez. Brandon, good to have you with us. So let's start in Florida. They got Amendment 3 that would legalize recreational marijuana in Florida. Former President Trump made some headlines when he said he's going to vote yes on this one. What should we know about it?
Yeah, and what's interesting about former President Trump's comments is that he not only said he would vote yes on the legalization at the state level, but also that if he was president, he would seek reclassification at the federal level, right? In Florida, they're voting on whether or not they're going to allow recreational use for adults who are 21 years of age or older. Now, there's a little bit of concern from the opposing side saying that, you know, the public consumption could be an issue. The state of New York is always pointed to the idea that you can always sort of smell cannabis, smell people smoking marijuana out in public. They don't want that same thing to happen in Florida. But on the opposite side, those who are in favor of it are saying that's not going to happen here. It's already been a legalized market at the medicinal level. And so there's less concern in terms of the adoption of the drug for recreational use.
Smelled it on the streets a couple times yesterday. All right, so we should ask then Vice President Harris, when it comes to this issue of cannabis reform, where does she stand?
Yeah, I mean, if you're looking at track record, I mean, she has definitely been supporter of federal reclassification longer than, say, President Trump has been. She currently in her role with the Biden administration has been pushing for federal reclassification of the drug. Right now, it's classified alongside drugs like heroin. A reclassification would put it more in line with drugs like Tylenol with codeine or steroids, which would open up research opportunities as well for the medicinal use purposes.
We've also got marijuana on the ballot in Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota. Tell us about those measures.
Yeah, so those are a little bit different, but also interesting. So South Dakota, North Dakota, also recreational use. Nebraska, that is where you would sort of have medicinal use, because right now it is fully illegal in Nebraska. What's interesting here is some industry experts that I've spoken to, they say with the more red states that we can get in order to classify this as recreational use legalized, the closer we get to federal reclassification. They actually pointed to an interesting comparison, which was same-sex marriage, which for a long time was state by state. By the time it reached 37 states, there was federal law that allowed for same-sex marriage. Now, it's a little apples and oranges, but they're looking at those ballot measures as a similar comparison for when we can expect federal laws weighing in this issue.
All right, this might be a look at the future here. Like, while some states debate marijuana, you got Massachusetts, which is actually looking at psychedelics. Talk more about what we're seeing here.
Yeah, you could consider that an even step further in expanding the drug market. So for psychedelics, I mean, we're talking about things like microdosing mushrooms, MDMA. A lot of it has been researched for therapeutic purposes, and so that's really where this ballot measure comes from. You do have Senator Elizabeth Warren saying she would support the legalization of psychedelics if, and this is a big if, there was a governing body that oversaw it where either all sales and use of the drug was reported through. So you do have support for it. A Emerson poll found that about 50% of Massachusetts residents would vote in favor of this. But again, I think that there's still a little bit of a touchy understanding from Americans as to the use of psychedelics for medicinal reasons.
See what happens. All right.
Definitely.
Brandon Gomez, thank you so much. Appreciate it. With less than 24 hours until Election Day, tensions are running high as voters head to the polls.
And that's why many parents struggling with how to discuss the election with their children. After the break, we're going to talk with an expert to find out what you can do to help tackle tough topics. Stay with us.
Finally this hour, with Election Day now less than 24 hours away and the country divided over so many issues, many parents are faced with a challenge.
And nearly 2/3 of Americans say they feel angry or exhausted by today's political climate. That's according to the Pew Research Center. And talking about politics can be even more difficult for parents and guardians with younger kids.
Psychotherapist Dr. Robbie Ludwig joins us now to share some tips on how to handle that conversation. This is something a lot of parents are asking about, talking about. Dr. Robbie, that Pew Research Center data also shows many Americans describe politics as divisive. That's a tough conversation for anyone to talk about, especially with kids. So how can parents start a conversation about politics with their kids? At what age should you even have that conversation?
This is such a good question, because you can talk to your child about politics as young as 5 years old, but you want to talk about the general concepts of it. We have a democracy where everybody who is of age gets to vote and make a choice, and that there are checks and balances in place, and that people have diverse opinions, and that is the way a democracy works. So general ideas, that is also good for adults to remember as well.
It's interesting to hear you say that you start this as young as 5. How would you recommend that parents approach teaching their kids about politics and how it all works in general? What resources are available to try to kind of, be a teacher starting at that age in your own home on something so important?
I mean, there's so much online that we can go through, and just even a coloring book to say, this is, what a Republican is. This is what a Democrat is. This is how it all works. We get to choose and vote and have the freedom to do so based on what we believe in. We get to vote who becomes president. Sometimes things go our way. Sometimes they don't. And then whatever they absorb. But at least you are giving yourself an opportunity to share the beauty of this democratic system.
Yeah, a lesson in winning and losing and good sportsmanship. So here's another thing. Kids get older. How should parents handle it when teenager or a college-age kid might actually disagree with them politically?
This is a tough one. It happens all the time. And at first you want to focus on what you have in common, that you feel strongly about certain things in this country and you'd like to see certain changes take place. And this is true for all of us. We want to learn how to listen empathically and with curiosity. Half the country has a different idea of how things should go or what's important to them. So we could start in our own home and tell our kids, a lot of people will not share the same belief, and it's equally as important to listen with curiosity before attacking them. And also just, really being interested in what they have to say. We are not going to change anyone's minds about politics, and that's true in our own home, but we can discuss the ethics of it, of listening with curiosity and keeping an open mind.
Is this tougher if the parents have different political views from each other? And if that is the case for someone in their home, what would you recommend?
Sometimes it might make sense not to discuss it if it's too inflamed a topic. Or it could be a wonderful opportunity for each parent to say, this is why I think the way I do. These are the policies that are most important to me. And you can see a difference of opinion play out in your own home. And we have to understand that people have different ideas. And once we understand that, I think we can embrace this whole process instead of thinking everybody has to have the same idea, that we can respect people too who have different ideas, even if we don't sign on to those ideas.
We only have like 15 seconds here, but half the country is going to be upset. If you have that anger because you lost, how do you handle that around your kids?
You can acknowledge, I'm really disappointed. I'm angry the way things turned out and upset. but I'm going to still continue to take steps to work on what I believe in my local government and do things that matter to me to make a difference. We can all do that as Americans, regardless who wins.
All right, Dr. Robbie Ludwig, good conversation. Thank you for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now.
Don't go anywhere, though. The news, of course, continues right now.
Right now on Morning News Now, it is the last dance before Election Day. We are just 24 hours away from polling sites officially opening up their doors to voters. Both Vice President Harris and former President Trump now wrapping up their all-out battleground blitz, making their final pitches to the American people that they are right for the White House.
We have an opportunity in this election to finally turn the page on a decade of politics driven by fear and division. We are done with that, and we are exhausted with it.
But all I can say is on Tuesday, just go out and vote, and we're going to close this thing out, and it's going to be party time.
We've got team coverage this morning from all angles of the campaign trail as an astounding 76 million people across the country hit the ballot box early. Plus, we're digging into our final NBC News poll on where each candidate stands. And spoiler alert, it's looking like the race is a whole lot closer than anybody could have imagined. Elsewhere in America this morning, a big week for Boeing. Members of one of its largest unions voting on a new labor deal that could end that 7-week strike. So how will the aero giant fare, and how has it all impacted Boeing's already embattled production line? Our Tom Costello breaks it down. And he was the undisputed heart and soul of modern pop music, forging legendary partnerships with everyone, from Ray Charles to Frank Sinatra to Michael Jackson. This morning, we are remembering the legendary Quincy Jones, passing on at the age of 91. Good to have you with us on a big Monday morning, a pivotal week in politics. I'm Joe Fryer.
And I'm Savannah Sellers.
Let's begin this hour with the race for the White House now in its final hours.
Yeah, today's the last full day of the campaign for both Vice President Harris and former President Trump, who spent the weekend on the trail in battleground states. It'll be another busy day ahead for the candidates as they make their final pitch to undecided voters. NBC News Chief White House correspondent Peter Alexander kicks off our coverage from Philadelphia, where Vice President Harris will be later tonight.
Good morning to you. This is where Vice President Harris is going to close out her 3.5-month campaign, a rally late tonight in Philly featuring Ricky Martin and Lady Gaga, among others. The Harris campaign projecting confidence right now, arguing while former President Trump's closing message is focused on anger and darkness, that their final pitch is positive and optimistic.
East Lansing, are we ready to do this?
Overnight, Vice President Harris in Michigan.
We have momentum. It is on our side.
That rally aides say her first since becoming the Democratic nominee, where she did not mention former President Trump by name. Another notable change, Harris beginning with remarks on the Israel-Hamas war, saying she would support Israel's security and acknowledging the losses of the war.
This year has been difficult, given the scale of death and destruction. And as president, I will do everything in my power to end the war in Gaza.
The swing state remains neck and neck. And Harris has faced criticism over the White House's handling of the war from some of the sizable Muslim population there, where former President Trump has also been courting votes. Former President Obama also in the Midwest, touching on the Middle East war too, on a stop in Wisconsin.
Maybe you're Muslim American or Jewish American, and you are heartbroken and furious about the ongoing bloodshed in the Middle East and worried about the rise of anti-Semitism. Why would you place your faith in somebody who instituted a so-called Muslim ban, who sat down for pleasantries with Holocaust deniers?
And as she wraps up the campaign, the vice president's urging voters to ignore recent indications by Trump that he might prematurely claim victory Tuesday night, like he did 4 years ago.
I would ask, in particular, people who have not yet voted, to not fall for his tactic. Everyone must know that their vote is their power to determine the outcome of the election, and their vote will count.
Harris squeezing in a surprise detour to SNL to appear alongside the woman who plays her, Maya Rudolph.
Now, Kamala, take my Pamela. The American people want to stop the chaos and end the drama.
Harris this weekend announced that she has cast her ballot, sending it in by mail. And in these closing hours and days, you know, it's the campaign's efforts to get out the vote, the ground game, they say. Who is best positioned to get out that vote? The Harris campaign points to its weekend numbers, saying, listen to this, more than 90,000 volunteers knocked on more than 3 million doors across those key battleground states. Back to you.
All right, Peter, thank you so much.
Former President Trump has a busy day ahead with campaign stops today in North Carolina and Pennsylvania. Both are key states, crucial in the Trump campaign's potential path for an electoral college win. He, too, spent the weekend delivering his final pitch to voters. NBC's Garrett Hake has been covering the Trump campaign, joined us now from Pittsburgh with more on the former president's final day on the campaign trail ahead. Garrett, good morning.
Hey, Joe, good morning to you. Get this, Donald Trump has been a presidential candidate for 719 days, a campaign that has completely worn out the word unprecedented. Now he has just one day left to convince the American people to send him back to the Oval Office. Overnight, Donald Trump making one final pitch to voters in battleground Georgia.
I'd like to begin by asking you a very simple question. Are you better off now than you were 4 years ago?
Trump spending the last Sunday of the race in the 3 states most critical to his campaign strategy, attacking Democrats.
It's a very demonic party.
And rallying in pivotal Pennsylvania, where the former president mused that he should have never left the White House despite his 2020 campaign loss.
The day that I left, I shouldn't have left. I mean, honestly, because we did so well.
Trump also remarking on the bulletproof glass that mostly enclosed him on stage, noting that anyone who might want to shoot at him would have to fire through the reporters covering him.
And I have this piece of glass here, but all we have really over here is the fake news, right? And to get me, somebody would have to shoot through the fake news. And I don't mind that so much.
His campaign later defending that remark, releasing a statement that claimed his comment had, quote, nothing to do with the media being harmed, and that Trump was, quote, actually looking out for their welfare. The former president also making his closing argument in a video airing during NASCAR and Sunday Night Football coverage yesterday.
Just remember, Kamala and her friends broke it. I'll fix it. Most important election in the history of our country. Go and vote.
The mood on his campaign plane described by an aide as more subdued and focused, less freewheeling in the race's final days. In an interview with NBC News on Sunday, Trump himself sounding wistful about the approaching end of 9 years of nearly constant campaigning. I enjoy doing it, Trump said of his rallies. There's never been anything like it. A long day and a potentially very late night ahead for Trump today, Joe. He starts in North Carolina for one last rally there, then 2 events in Pennsylvania, including here in Pittsburgh, before finishing this campaign in Grand Rapids, Michigan, the same city where he finished his 2016 and 2020 campaigns. A little superstition there from the candidate. Joe?
All right, Garrett, thank you so much.
Well, Georgia is once again one of the most crucial swing states in the race for the White House this time around. Black voters played a major role in helping President Biden flip the state back in 2020. This year, though, there are questions over how many of those voters will also turn out for Vice President Kamala Harris. Democratic Senator Raphael Warnock joined Kristen Walker on Meet the Press to discuss.
Polls have consistently shown that Kamala Harris is trailing where President Biden was when it comes to black voters. Former President Barack Obama, as you know, had a pretty blunt message for black male voters. He called them out for, quote, not feeling the idea of a woman president. Do you agree with former President Barack Obama?
I can tell you what I'm feeling on the ground. I've been all over this country to several of the battleground states. I was in Michigan a couple weeks ago in a black fraternity house, my own fraternity. I've spent time in barbershops. I've been encountering folks, obviously, in my church and other churches. And there is momentum for Kamala Harris. And the more voters hear about her, including black men, the more they like her. Look, I've been through this. Folks were saying, and, you know, there was hand wringing when I was running. And folks were saying, well, we're not sure about this turnout. Let me tell you something. Black men are not going to show up in droves and waves voting for Donald Trump. They're not. And it's because they know who he is. This is the man who took out a full-page ad in the New York Times saying that the Central Park Five, these young men of color, should get the death penalty for what was indeed a heinous crime. And when it was proven that they were innocent, he doubled down. Kamala Harris, on the other hand, understands the concerns of the African-American community. She's laid out a plan to support and strengthen black businesses, women-owned businesses, because she understands that small businesses are the backbone of our country. I'm proud of our coalition. It looks like America. And I believe that come Tuesday, while it's going to be a tight race, I believe the country is going to get this right. Here is my concern. We can all go back and forth. You know, I don't pay much attention to polls. I really trust what I feel on the ground. The race will be decided on Tuesday. We are seeing record turnout. And the Harris campaign, to their credit, is doing the hard work. They knocked on 56,000 doors in Georgia this past Saturday. So they're putting in the work, but the race will be decided Tuesday. We need everybody to show up.
Thanks to Kristen Welker for bringing us that exclusive interview. Now, President Biden narrowly flipped Georgia during the last election, winning the state by less than half a percentage point in 2020. That came after former President Trump won the battleground state back in 2016 over Hillary Clinton.
Let's take a look at the final NBC News poll before tomorrow's election with our senior political editor, Mark Murray, who's here with us in New York. So doesn't get much closer than this when it comes to the national 49-49, but it ultimately comes down to the battleground states. What are we seeing there as we get into this final day?
Joe, it's another close race. In our poll, you're exactly right, national, it was even Steven, and you end up looking in battlegrounds from the Sun Belt states to the Great Lakes states, and it's all really close. And so I think that everyone needs to be on mind that this could end up being an election that could come down to 500 votes in a place like Pennsylvania or North Carolina. Wow. But it also could end up being where one candidate, either Donald Trump or Kamala Harris, end up having a decisive victory. You know, there could be a polling error in one way. You could end up having where one candidate just kind of wins enough in each of the battleground states to be able to have a comfortable electoral college victory. And so I think as we go into tomorrow night, all bets are on. And it's kind of almost a choose-your-own-adventure kind of election season, and we just have to count the ballots.
There we go. Let's talk through the issues and how that's showing up in polling. We know there are a few issues that are very motivating to voters. Abortion, the economy. What are we seeing about how each candidate's going to handle these?
Yeah, Savannah, this has actually been a consistent theme where Harris ends up having a decisive advantage when it comes to an issue like abortion, leading Donald Trump by 20 points on who would better handle abortion. She also ends up who would look out for the middle class and also bringing the country together. Some of those kind of presidential characteristics that Harris is doing well. Donald Trump, meanwhile, has the lead on the economy as well as on the cost of living. And then he has a 25-point lead on the border and immigration. And so that kind of issue matrix, to me, has been very, very consistent. But as you ended up also mentioning, what is more motivating? And we had an earlier poll that actually showed that abortion was a motivating issue. A lot of people often say inflation is their number one issue, but what will really drive you to the polls? And we're going to have to wait and see.
And abortion is one of those issues where people who are Republicans might actually choose to vote for Harris. That's going to be the big question, is whether it happens in some of these swing states. All right, we've been talking the last few months, the huge story when it comes to polling has been the gender gap. And our last poll, it got even bigger, right?
So in October, our poll last month had a 30-point gender gap between the difference between men and women, their support of Harris and Trump. Now our poll, it's now 34 points, with men backing Donald Trump by 18 percentage points and Harris winning women by 16 percentage points. And Joe, you know, we'll have to wait and see for the exit polls if this kind of matches up. But if this is even close to, this could end up being the defining story in this election season. Just the difference. We are so divided as a country, but also just looking at gender, this gender gap. And I'm going to be watching that tomorrow night.
Absolutely. While we have you, we have to ask you about this Des Moines Register poll. So it has Harris ahead of Trump now in Iowa for this election season, has been assumed red. How significant is this to you?
So I've been covering presidential politics for 20 years. And every cycle, you always end up having some shock polls that are shocks to the system. This is the first time that we've actually had one of these this entire cycle. Like, oh, my goodness, what is happening in Iowa? And so it's important for us to pay attention. Ann Selzer, who conducts this poll, she's partnered with NBC in the past, very respected pollster. I paid attention when these results came out. Are they in line with what everything else we're seeing? Probably not. But I think the poll is very helpful in this regard, and kind of going back to all possibilities are open. There is the possibility that Harris does much better than all the polls are indicating. Yeah. And so I think this one poll is a nice snapshot, just a reminder that not everything might be 49-49 everywhere. One candidate could end up running away with it. But on the other hand, this certainly looks on a surface to be an outlier poll. But again, we're going to wait and count the ballots in Iowa.
Right. All right, Mark, thank you. Good to have you with us.
Thank you.
Great to have you in New York. Well, turning now to North Carolina, where over the weekend, both campaigns made a big push for the battleground state and its 16 electoral votes.
North Carolina, I'm here to ask for your vote.
We win this state, we're going to win the whole ball game, you know.
Former President Trump has never lost in the state, beating President Biden by 1.3 percentage points in 2020 and Hillary Clinton by 3.6 percentage points in 2016. In fact, Democrats have won North Carolina's electoral votes only twice in the last half century. So can they manage it this time around, or will they come up short?
We've got NBC News correspondent Antonia Hilton joining us from Raleigh with more. Antonia, always great to have you with us. So Democrat hasn't taken North Carolina in a presidential race since 2008, but polls show a tight race in the state, with the latest NBC News poll showing Trump up by just 1.1% in the battleground state. Tell us right now what we're hearing from each campaign about how they're feeling after these stops over the weekend.
Hey, good morning, guys. Look, both campaigns at this point, they're projecting strength here in North Carolina. They see this as a jump ball, and they acknowledge that this is going to be a really close fight. But for one campaign, that's a bit more of a concerning story, because for the Trump campaign, this was a state that was supposed to be in their column all along. They weren't necessarily preparing these last several months to have to defend their territory here. And now they are here every single one of these final days, coming back and back again to try to rally their base. And what that says to the Democrats that I've spoken to here is that they must be seeing internal data that is frightening them a little bit about what's going to happen here tomorrow. And you know, it's been interesting to see during the early voting period here the patterns. There was fear after Hurricane Helene that would affect voter turnout. Instead, we've actually seen people from those counties overperform people's expectations. Republicans coming out incredibly strong at first, and then a sort of later swing of Democrats coming out really strong in these last few days. So it is really going to be a fight here. But for the Democrats, the fact that it's this close is really, it's frankly heartwarming. And they're looking at that Iowa poll you were just talking about with Mark, because to them, that's going to be an interesting piece of data too. You know, if white rural voters in a place like Iowa might be more excited about Harris than polls have been picking up, there are very similar electorates, communities here. And that means if they can get communities of color, if they can get the youth vote here, and they can overperform with those voters, things may be looking really like 2008 for them come tomorrow, guys.
Yeah, I mean, Antonio, you mentioned the early voting, and North Carolina has shattered its previous early voting record. Just what are people on the ground telling you about why they're voting early?
Yeah, they 4.2 or over 4.2 million people took part in early voting. This is a state that's always loved early voting, so they always see a large percentage of the eligible and registered voters participate. But they shattered those records. Well over 50%, almost 60% of registered voters participated already. And that's good news to the election workers here, who know there are going to be some long lines tomorrow, but at least they know a lot will be out of the way already. And as I spoke to voters who were waiting in some of these hours-long lines, I heard a few things come up. For men and women, especially in the metro areas, abortion, abortion, abortion. I had a lot of interesting conversations actually with young Gen Z and millennial men who were saying that, you know, they had girlfriends who had been talking to them about abortion, or they were worried about their moms or their sisters or their girlfriends and wives, and how they have been made to feel during this election cycle. And they were kind of seeing their vote as almost a favor or action taken on their behalf. And then Republicans here are trying to defend their turf. Economy and really financial issues come up first for them. And look, they feel very confident too here. So it's really going to be all about turnout in some of these remaining counties. What do they look like tomorrow, guys?
So interesting. Somewhere we will certainly be keeping our eyes on and checking in with you. Antonia, thank you so much.
The National Guard is on standby in several states ahead of Election Day. NBC News correspondent Stephanie Goss shows us what's being done to prepare for potential unrest.
This heightened protection comes after local officials say hundreds of ballots were potentially damaged or destroyed in Washington state and Oregon, and concern over a possible repeat of what happened on January 6th. But some states are pushing back against the federal government's plan.
This morning, with just 1 day to go, unprecedented new measures are underway to keep Americans safe and to protect the vote. Security will be dramatically stepped up at polling stations nationwide on Election Day, amid concerns of potential violence and voter intimidation. After 2 ballot drop boxes were deliberately set on fire, some now have fire extinguishers.
They're tested, they're true. They got the approval of all of our local firefighters.
At many county and government buildings, barricades are up. And at some polling locations, new bulletproof glass has been installed to protect workers, along with emergency panic buttons. In Washington, D.C., fencing is going up at the White House and the vice president's residence, and many businesses are already boarding up their storefronts. The Justice Department now plans to monitor polls in 27 states to ensure compliance. But some Republican-led states like Texas are pushing back, saying federal monitors will not be allowed in. In the swing state of Michigan, officials say they're prepared to stop any violence.
We're ready, and we have partnerships with law enforcement and others to protect the people who protect democracy.
But perhaps an even bigger issue, the online spread of disinformation and lies, particularly coming from Russia, China, and Iran, intended to disrupt the election.
We came to America 6 months ago.
That includes the fake viral video showing supposed Haitian immigrants voting multiple times. Federal officials say Russian interference groups are behind the fake video.
Russian produced and specifically designed to go viral to undermine American confidence in the security and integrity of our elections.
The FBI also concerned about 2 videos falsely claiming to be from the FBI relating to election security. One stating the FBI has apprehended 3 linked groups committing ballot fraud, and a second relating to the second gentleman.
The FBI says it's working closely with state and local law enforcement to respond to election threats. Officials urge voters to report any concerns and be aware of potentially fake or misleading election-related content by verifying that it's from a trusted source. Back to you.
Stephanie, thank you.
This morning, another round of severe weather could be in store for millions across the plains. The system is now expected to move east on Election Day.
Meteorologist Michelle Grossman is here with the forecast, which could have an impact on some voters. Michelle, good morning.
And I think it will. Hi there, guys. And we are looking at some very active weather even early this morning. We're going to keep that active weather in place tomorrow for Election Day. This is what radar looks like right now. You can see a lot going on, especially in the south through the central states, up through parts of the Midwest. We have very heavy rain falling in spots. That's going to lead to flooding, even flash flooding. Seeing those darker colors, the reds, the oranges, the yellows, that's where we're seeing the heaviest downpours. Even looking at some severe storms right now throughout Oklahoma, and that will be the case as we go throughout the day. We're going to ramp up that severe threat. So 17 million people impacted by the risk of severe weather, especially where you see the orange. That's where we're expecting the chance for some stronger tornadoes. So winds gusting up to 60 miles per hour. That's one of the risks there. Damaging hail, several tornadoes, and also the chance of heavy, heavy downpours. We have flood alerts, 7 million people impacted. Where you see the green, that is a flood watch. So Wichita, Tulsa, Oklahoma City, Wichita Falls, Fort Smith. We also have flash flood warnings. Harrison, you are under a flash flood warning. That means flooding is happening now or it's imminent. And we're going to see that all throughout the day and also tomorrow on Election Day. This is why we're expecting a lot of rain throughout portions of the south central states into the Midwest, the Great Lakes, so Chicago, St. Louis, Little Rock, Houston, looking at the chance for some really heavy rainfall. This is Election Day. Notice it moves a little bit further to the east, but not much further. So now we're talking about parts of the central Gulf Coast states all the way up to the Great Lakes. You see some heavy rain expected as well. Not expecting as quite of a severe weather threat, but still could see some gusty thunderstorms. Also, the Intermountain West looking really heavy snowfall. We have a Pacific Northwest storm moving onshore that's going to move to the east tomorrow, and that will bring some lower elevation rain and then some mountain snow. So the battleground states, what are we expecting there? While we head towards places like Pennsylvania, it's going to be dry above average. Actually, a really nice day there. Looking at some showers in portions of the Midwest. Down to the southeast, could see some showers in Charlotte and Asheville. Otherwise, we're looking warm and nice throughout portions of the southeast. Back to you guys.
All right, warm and nice. We love to hear that, Michelle. Thanks.
Sad news from the music world this morning. Quincy Jones, a titan of the entertainment industry who worked with a who's who of stars for more than 70 years, has died at the age of 91. Here's a look back at his life and legacy. known to so many simply as Q. For more than 60 years, Quincy Jones shaped music history as a producer, arranger, musician, and legendary collaborator. Born in 1933, Quincy Delight Jones Jr. discovered an early love for music, riffing on the trumpet with the Seattle jazz scene.
We were working at grown-up nightclubs until 4 and 5 in the morning when we were 13 and 14 years old.
Before long, Jones discovered his true passion, arranging and producing. Breaking barriers and working with music legends.
I would like to have you meet a gentleman who's been doing these marvelous orchestrations for me, Mr. Quincy Jones. Right there. Fly me to the moon.
Composing music for Hollywood films and iconic TV shows, including the theme for Roots. Perhaps his biggest collaboration changed the landscape of music. Producing 3 blockbuster albums with Michael Jackson, including the best-selling album of all time.
It was a great ride. The whole 80s was great for me.
Another highlight of that decade.
1, 2.
We are the world. Jones was the driving force behind a legendary collaboration. The top artists of the time releasing We Are the World to raise money for famine relief. The project was captured in a recent Netflix documentary, Jones spanning decades of musical evolution.
I feel blessed to have been born in that era, to have come up with swing all the way up through to rap today. Blessed, absolutely blessed.
Quincy Jones, a musical visionary who filled the world with so much rhythm, simply by following his own beats. Even into his 9th decade, he told Al Roker the music was still in him.
I feel like I'm just getting started.
You're just getting started?
Yeah, man, I really do.
During his career, Jones earned numerous awards, including 28 Grammys. That puts him 3rd on the all-time list, 2 honorary Academy Awards, and 1 Emmy. Truly, according to his family, one of a kind, perhaps the greatest musician of our time, certainly one of the greats ever.
So amazing to hear about all the collaborations.
And the tributes will be pouring in all morning and all day long from everyone in the music industry.
Yeah, very cool. Well, there's much more to come on this hour of Morning News Now, including a look at how a Trump or Harris administration might impact both their money and the American economy at large.
But first, after the break, a big week for Boeing and a labor vote that could bring an end to that weeks-long union strike. We've got more on that next.
We're back with a critical vote taking place today for troubled aerospace giant Boeing. After more than 7 weeks on the picket line, 33,000 striking machinists are set to decide whether to accept or reject the company's latest deal. And union leaders are warning this may be the best they're going to get. NBC News senior correspondent Tom Costello has been covering this the whole time for us. He joins us with the latest. Tom, any sense of how today's vote is going to go?
I think it's going to go down to the wire, Savannah. Today is day 53 of the Boeing strike. Union leaders who've been at the negotiating table told their members, after members rejected 2 previous offers, that this time they should accept Boeing's latest offer. One of those leaders told the Seattle Times that Boeing's CEO intervened directly in the negotiations last week with the Labor Department and warned that if the union rejects this latest offer, the next one will not be as generous, and union leaders apparently believe him, and that's why they are urging their rank-and-file members to vote yes on what they call this historic agreement. The offer on the table would raise pay by 38% over 4 years. Boeing says that means that would bring salaries up to $119,000 for the average machinist, as you can see, and then a better 401k match and $12,000 in a signing bonus. A simple majority is all that's needed to pass, so all eyes are going to be on the Pacific Northwest tonight for this voting. Savannah?
Tom, obviously there has been so much conversation about Boeing and what's going on at this company, everything from the door plug to several other issues that we've seen. Just put in context for us, what is at stake for Boeing here?
Well, listen, let's make it very clear. Boeing is in deep trouble. This has been a rough few months, a rough few years for this company. Production brought to a standstill on the 737, the 767, the 777. Then they have this quarterly loss, $6 billion in the last quarter. Boeing still planning to lay off 10% of its workforce this month. And the stock down 40% year to date. It's not producing planes. It needs to wrap up this dispute and get its machinists back to work. And as long as this doesn't happen, as long as Boeing is idle, for the most part, the 787 is coming off the line, but that's it. That's produced in South Carolina. As long as Seattle area is idle, this company is going to go further into deep trouble, and there are a lot of questions about its future.
All right, Tom Costello, thank you so much.
Okay.
Now to new developments from overnight on the war in Gaza.
NBC News International correspondent Claudio Lavanga joins us from Rome with more. Hey, Claudio, good morning.
Savannah, Joe, good morning. Well, Israel has officially notified the United Nations that it is withdrawing from an agreement that recognized or has recognized its Agency for Palestinian Refugees since 1967 after claims that Hamas deeply infiltrated that agency and even that some of its staff took part in the October the 7th attacks. Now, the United Nations and some of Israel's Western allies raised concern that the decision may further worsen the already dire humanitarian situation in Gaza. In the meantime, authorities in Gaza say at least 31 people were killed in Israeli airstrikes on Sunday. Let's go to Ukraine now, where at least 15 people were wounded after Russian forces attacked the city of Kharkiv and the surrounding region with guided aerial bombs on Sunday. The regional governor wrote on Telegram that the attack damaged 2 residential buildings, 2 supermarkets, a cafe, 21 kiosks and a shopping center, and that 4 Interior Ministry employees are among the injured. Kharkiv is Ukraine's second largest city, and it has been a frequent target since Russia's invasion. And let's end this tour of the world in Britain, where on Saturday, the Conservative Party elected for the first time in its history a black woman as its new leader. 44-year-old Kemi Badenoch replaces former Prime Minister Rishi Sunak, who stepped down in July after he led the Conservative Party to their worst election result since 1832. In her victory speech, Badenoch said the party's job was to hold the Labour government to account and to craft pledges and a plan for government. Joe, Savannah.
All right, political news everywhere. Claudio, thank you. Coming up, continuing coverage of our Decision Day 2024.
After the break, we'll focus on where each candidate stands on America's economy and how either a Trump or Harris White House might impact your wallet. Stay with us. It's up next.
We're back now with a closer look at the state of our economy ahead of tomorrow's election.
Yeah, the economy, of course, seen as one of the biggest issues among voters, ranking at the top of most polls. How does each candidate stack up, though, in this regard? We've got NBC News senior business correspondent Christine Roman's here to break down some of these latest trends and walk us through what it could mean. Christine, good morning.
Good morning.
So talk to us about what it is we are seeing in this final NBC News election poll when it comes to how voters believe each candidate would handle the economy and just how important it is to them.
We've been hearing for months, guys, how voters are so dissatisfied with the state of the economy and inflation in particular. But this is our most recent, our last snapshot. This is the end of the polls. This is the end of us talking about what people say they think. And we're going to know what they really think starting tomorrow. So we asked people who's best for dealing with the cost of living. 52% said Donald Trump. 40% said Kamala Harris. Who's looking out for the middle class? A flip there, really. 51% said Kamala Harris, 42% said Donald Trump. So that's the last view we have. And you know, we don't know where the economy will rank on people's energizing factors when they go into the voting booth, but we do know they've been talking about it for some time.
You said inflation. That has been the economic buzzword in recent times. Walk us through inflation. How has it changed over these last few years?
So I think a lot of voters really remember this painful period here when you had a 9% inflation. That was a real tough spot for the economy. And all those years, actually, of higher prices have meant that baseline prices, especially at the grocery store, are higher here. But here are wages. And wages are now growing faster than inflation and have been for some time. And economists tell me over time, people will start to feel that and feel better about things. But look, wages up 20%. over the past 4 years, but the grocery bill up 22%. So you continue to hear people so concerned about the grocery bill because it has over time been running higher than their wages have been. So I just broke down some numbers for you. Egg prices almost triple. Now, there's the avian flu here. You can't really blame a president for the avian flu, but this is something that causes people to feel unhappy when they go to the grocery store. Gas prices are higher than they were when Joe Biden or when Donald Trump was president. And you hear that a lot, especially from Trump voters who want to see $2 gas again and rent. This is the other thing. Shelter costs have been so expensive. And that has been a part of the economy with higher interest rates that has made it very difficult to be a first-time home buyer. All of these are little reasons why people say they feel so bad about the economy.
Yeah, you've helped us through that so much when we get these good data points, but we still hear that from voters. Why is that? What is it? What about the stock market, Christine? How's that performed over the past few years?
A couple of numbers to show you here about the stock market. Under Donald Trump, it was up 67%. That is a huge gain for 4 years in the stock market. And quite frankly, you saw record after record after record. Under Joe Biden, it's up another 48%. Record after record after record. You could almost argue that the stock market, no matter who has been president, has been moving higher because conditions have been, quite frankly, just so good for companies to make money.
Christine, thank you so much.
You're welcome. Thanks, Christine. Well, today marks, of course, the final full day of the 2024 campaign season. And we want to shine a spotlight on a special group of journalists who have been our eyes and ears on the ground throughout this election cycle.
Yeah, this year NBC News deployed 9 campaign embeds to travel the country following all the twists and turns of the presidential race.
It's a prestigious assignment that can lead to big things. Our own top story anchor, Tom Yamas, he got his start as a campaign embed back in 2004. Our Capitol Hill correspondents, Garrett Haken, Ali Vitale, them too. Also correspondents Von Hilliard and Shaquille Brewster. Well, 2 of this year's embeds are joining us now to tell us about what it was like behind the scenes, what this all was like while you're out there on the ground. Nnamdi Egwuonwu is in Philadelphia following all of the vice president's campaign events on this election eve. Alex Tabbitt covered the Iowa caucuses for 8 months before moving on to Arizona. He joins us from Phoenix. 2 people you've probably seen on our air a couple times throughout this campaign season because that's what happens. You just get thrown on. Nnamdi, I'll get started with you. You were a segment producer prior to this for MSNBC's The Last Word with Lawrence O'Donnell and previously Zerlina on Peacock. What were your expectations going into this assignment? Was it you'll never be at home and you hardly get sleep? And was that the reality?
Yeah. Well, you know, prior to me applying, they described it to me as an 18-month boot camp. And honestly, that's been a pretty accurate assessment. It's been a whirlwind that has absolutely refined us as journalists. Like, we have the opportunity to travel to dozens of states, even more cities, talk to hundreds of people and interview, write stories, shoot social media content. It's been great. And I don't think there is any other election that could be as unique to cover as this one, and getting the opportunity to be on the front lines and sort of be there for all of these huge moments, whether it's the debate, the DNC, the RNC, the primaries. It's just been an incredible opportunity all around.
Alex, you were an associate producer here on NBC News Now before becoming an embed, so we had already been working with you. You and I just shot a story together in Minnesota a few weeks ago. What are some of the big lessons you've learned while on the campaign trail? And is there one moment you think you're still going to remember, say, 20 years from now?
Well, Joe, for the rest of my life, I'll always remember this story. Just a couple days before the Iowa caucuses, a major snowstorm hit the state, and that caused all the major candidates to cancel their political events. All the candidates except for the one that I was covering, of course, Vivek Ramaswamy. So through the snow and howling winds, I hit his first, second, third, and fourth political events of the day. And on my way to the 5th political event, as I was driving on the highway, just as the sun was setting, I heard a thud, and I had hit a mound of snow. And I was stuck, and I looked over at my dashboard, and it said negative 15 degrees. So I had 2 options. I could stay in the car, where it was warm, but I was in the middle of the highway and a bit of a sitting duck. Or I could get on the shoulder, but it was negative 15 degrees. So I called 911, and they told me that not too far away from where I was, there's a farm. And I should head over there and see if I could take shelter. So I put on my hat, my gloves, I sprinted over to the farm, I banged on the door, and a very kind man, Wally, opened the door. He took me in, he gave me food, he gave me shelter. The next morning, he shoveled my car, or helped shovel my car out of the snow. And I think the lesson there is we live in a politically polarized climate where I think a lot of supporters from one candidate find it difficult to empathize with supporters from the other candidate and vice versa. But we really have so much more in common as Americans than what divides us. And the generosity and the kindness of the American people has been an honor to report on in the last year and a half.
Which is really great when you just think about how divisive it feels a lot of the times. You were on the front lines of this, and watching and feeling something like that happen must have been pretty awesome. Let's talk about where you're both going to be as we close this out. Nnamdi, where are you going to be on election night tomorrow, and how are you feeling now that the assignment's coming to an end?
Well, I'm going to be here in Philadelphia. The vice president is having her final rally before election night, election day here. There's going to be performances, I think, from like Fat Joe and Lady Gaga and a whole bunch of people. So that'll be a cool opportunity to cover. And also just talk to people and get a sense of how they're feeling in like the ultimate battleground state hours before, you know, we come to an end. And it's honestly, it's hard to wrap my head around the fact that the last year and a half is slowly winding down and coming to an end. It's, like I said, been an incredible opportunity, and it kind of feels like you've been running at 100 miles per hour, and now it's just coming to a halt. But I got to tell you, I do look forward to getting a full night of sleep and maybe a couple days of not doing anything. That will be great.
We don't blame you. And Alex, real quick, where are you going to be tomorrow night?
I'll be outside polling locations talking to voters, which is my favorite part of this job, and then I'll swing by Carrie Lake and Congressman Ruben Gallego, the Senate candidates here, to see what they're up to on election night.
A reminder just how much y'all have to juggle and cover. Nnamdi and Alex, thank you for your important reporting, for being our front lines, our eyes and ears, and thanks for joining us this morning. We'll talk to y'all soon. Well, coming up, something a little lighter on this Monday morning. In my opinion, there's only one correct answer to this question. Is it too early to get into the holiday spirit?
Christmas might be more than 50 days out. Some big retailers are already decking the halls, and cheery customers are getting wrapped up in festive deals. We'll give you the lowdown next. Welcome back. Financial headlines now. One major fashion brand isn't just hitting the runway, it's hitting the front page this morning.
CNBC's Silvana Henao joins us with the details on that cryptic message and some other money news. Hey, Silvana, good morning.
Hey, Savannah. Hey, Joe. Good morning to you. So shares of Burberry are rising on a report Italian fashion house Moncler may make a takeover bid. Moncler is best known for its high-end puffer jackets. Now, the report by luxury publication Mistweet says LVMH CEO Bernard Arnault, who recently invested in Moncler, is keen for a deal to happen. In a statement, Moncler says it won't comment on unsubstantiated rumors. Meanwhile, China continues to be a weaker market for Tesla. Government data out today shows the EV maker sold just over 68,000 locally made cars last month. That's down more than 5% from a year ago. Deliveries of China-made Model 3 and Model Ys dropping nearly 23% from September. Tesla's biggest Chinese rival, BYD, hitting another monthly sales record, selling more than 500,000 of its Dynasty and Ocean EVs. And Americans are being bombarded with political ads on TV, radio, and the internet. There was just shy of $1 billion spent on those ads up and down the ballot in the past week, according to research firm Ad Impact. That's about 1/10 of the more than $10 billion spent on political ads so far since the start of 2023. Even with Election Day tomorrow, it's not over yet. There's still more than $300 million in ad time booked between yesterday and Tuesday, guys.
Viewers aren't taking notes. They've seen them all.
Yes,
all right,
especially
Silvana.
if you live in one of the 7 battleground states.
Yes.
You're like,
Thank you, Silvana. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Well, while many of us might still be enjoying our Halloween candy, a lot of homes and stores are already getting decked out for Santa's arrival. NBC News correspondent Emily Aketa takes a dive into that age-old debate. How soon is too soon to gear up for the holidays?
Hey there, it's the return of a truly spirited debate. While some say no decking the halls until after Thanksgiving, others are caroling the sooner the better, and major retailers are singing along.
As the clock struck midnight on November 1st, Mariah Carey sending this simple message to fans. And the Queen of Christmas isn't alone. One survey says about 34% of Americans who plan to decorate will put up their outdoor holiday touches before Thanksgiving.
Now that Halloween is over, I wanted to show you how to properly bluff a Christmas tree.
And it's a beautiful tree.
It's an absolutely gorgeous tree.
In Massachusetts, this 74-foot Norway spruce will soon make its way to New York City to become the Rockefeller Center Christmas tree.
The Rockefeller tree is something we must see every year.
Christmas is here, you guys. I don't care what y'all say. We skip it Thanksgiving.
And retailers are all for it. Home Goods adding Deck the Everything Day to the calendar on November 1st to ring in the decorating season.
November 11th.
Black Friday! Black Friday! Black Friday is actually November 29th, but stores like Walmart, Target, and Amazon are all having early sales. And while the so-called Christmas creep, holiday merch and sales arriving weeks ahead of the season has some feeling like the Grinch.
These stockings, he grinned, are the first thing to go.
Nearly half of holiday shoppers started checking items off their list before Halloween, and 37% will begin this month. And consumers are also expected to spend over $260 on seasonal items, including decorations, greeting cards, food, and candy this year. And for those with a head start trimming the tree, it's a way to make spirits bright for a little while longer.
Early decorations make me happy because I'm saving money, I'm getting the deals, but then also you can enjoy the Christmas magic longer.
Before you start decorating, here are a few things to keep in mind. Make a plan, locate outlets, and take measurements so you know what you'll need. Consider spotlights or projected holiday lights for an easier setup. And don't throw away old or broken lights. Hardware stores will often recycle them for you. Back to you.
Wow, that's good to know. Emily Aketa, thank you so much. I'm very much team. It's Christmas time, and Thanksgiving, we all celebrate that too. It's just part of the lovely season. All right, coming up, you could call it the soundtrack to democracy. After the break, why music is playing such a big role at polling places across the country this election season. That's up next. Stay with us. Welcome back, and long live Brat Summer. I'll explain. Collins Dictionary has crowned brat the word of the year. This was, of course, sparked by singer Charli XCX's sixth album. It's called Brat. The phrase then turned into a global cultural movement. It triggered thousands of memes on social media. Political candidates co-opted the term. Well, we asked some of our Gen Z team members to help us define what it means to be brat. They say anyone can be brat or have a brat summer, and it's all about being unapologetic, independent, and confident. So it's actually a compliment now. They also used it in a sentence for us. You could use, that's so brat, or, and these are their words, not mine, Savannah is brat. So thank you, Team Morning News Now, because that's a compliment now. All right, finally this hour, going to the polls can be stressful. That's why there's a grassroots effort to try and add a relaxing soundtrack to your voting experience. NBC News Now anchor Hallie Jackson tells us more.
When professional musician Mike Block goes to the polls this Tuesday, he'll be bringing his cello and good vibes. It's part of a movement he started back in 2020 called Play for the Vote.
It was a stressful time during the pandemic. And so I had this flash of an idea. What if the music is making me feel better, what if I went to my polling location on Election Day and tried to help my community feel better?
His big idea, catching on. Mike rallied more than 1,000 musicians back then. And for this election day, the group's hoping for thousands more in all 50 states. Violinist Sarah Von Suttle was there last time and can't wait to go back.
There's a lot of focus on what divides us and our differences, but we all share music as an experience. We all share this amazing experience of being able to vote.
Play for the Vote even has the backing of big names like Yo-Yo Ma.
Would you please consider going to the polls and bring your instrument?
Music, energizing, and uniting voters in other communities, too. School marching bands leading the way to the polls during early voting, like these from around Dayton, Ohio. And then there's the North Carolina Central University Sound Machine, with Jalen Joyner drumming up excitement.
I saw people smiling, waving. You know, they were excited to have us there. It gave positive energy and see a lot of people cared about going out to vote and making a change.
It's a movement hitting all the right notes, inspiring others to be heard in this historic election.
All right, thanks to Hallie Jackson for that story. If you're interested in getting involved, you can check out playforthevote.org for more information. That's going to do it for this hour of Morning News Now on this very big and busy week. Don't go anywhere, though. The news continues right now.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.